setting out of our blueprint for what the first 100 days of a DA government would look like after the election. And this is important because in as little as 14 weeks from today, it will be the day before South Africa's 7th democratic election. 30 years after our country made the transition to democracy, the 2024 general election is set to be South Africa's next great transition. 1994 was a transition to rescue South Africa from exclusion and conflict. 2024 will be a transition to rescue South Africa from corruption and state collapse. The scale of change that this year's election will bring is unlike anything that we have witnessed since 1994. For the first time, the ANC will lose its national majority. For the first time, the ANC will lose its majority in many provinces in the country. And for the first time, the DA has a pathway to now enter provincial and national government beyond the borders of the Western Cape, while also winning our flagship province with a bigger outright majority. In April last year, I announced from the floor of the Democratic Alliance's Federal Congress that my party would commit itself to forming a moonshot pact with like-minded opposition parties. I vividly remember how, at that time, many commentators rushed to simply write this initiative off. Many claimed it would never get off the ground. Many said that opposition leaders did not have it within them to actually begin to work together for the first time in our democratic history. Nearly a year later, and those skeptics have been proved comprehensively wrong. Now known as the Multi-Party Charter for South Africa, this group of 11 parties have put in many, many long hours of work to forge the relationships that we need to form a new government. And I'm very grateful in the audience today to have the midwife of that process, Dr. William Gumede, with us. I didn't know the gender-specific male alternative for midwife, so I'm just using it as a general term, William. Yeah, mid-person. And just last week, the Charter had its first joint registration event, which brought together young voters from across the different parties who came together to show South Africa that we can win when we are united. The Charter has also been working very hard and adopted a series of joint policy approaches, and we plan to ramp up the activities as the election approaches. The level of inter-party cooperation is unprecedented in the history of South African democracy. That parties as diverse as the DA, the IFP, the Freedom Front Plus, Action SA, Asanko, the UIM, and others have been working together for nearly a full year before the election serves to illustrate a crucial point. It shows that in this election, we are serious. We are serious about offering an alternative that can win. We are serious about defeating the ANC and keeping the EFF and other radicals out of government. But above all, we are serious about rescuing South Africa. Because, like all of you in this audience today, we know that time is running out. But no party that wants to form the anchor of a new government in waiting could truly claim to be serious without a plan, without a blueprint. And that is why today is so radically different from the DA's previous pre-SONA events that many of you would have attended in previous years. Because I'm not here today to tell you about the state of South Africa. I think we all know the dire state that our country is in. I'm also not here to tell you what Cyril Ramaphosa is going to say at SONA, because frankly, it's irrelevant. We all know that he will only deflect, distract, and make empty promises that he cannot deliver on. What I am here today to do is to tell you about the DA's blueprint to rescue South Africa. And the truth is that never before has South Africa needed this blueprint than it does today. Just this past week, we saw yet another example about how President Ramaphosa is willing to put cadres before country. The President has now publicly told us that he refuses to act against the Deputy President that he appointed, despite alarming evidence which seems to point to systemic corruption and state capture perpetrated by his deputy, Paul Mashatile. And I want to emphasize an important point. The position of Deputy President is a political appointment. And that political appointment is made solely at the discretion of President Ramaphosa. It is therefore, frankly, another cowardly excuse for him to cower away and say that he needs the South African Police Service to tell him what to do. I've read the Constitution. The South African Police Service does not appoint or disappoint deputy presidents. The President of the Republic appoints and disappoints deputy presidents. Thabo Mbeki, you may recall, removed President or Deputy President Jacob Zuma on the basis of the very serious allegations that emerged around the Shabir Sheikh matter. It seems that Cyril Ramaphosa simply lacks the courage to do the same with his deputy president. And the best part is he can no longer claim that he didn't know, that he is shocked, that this is the first he's heard about it, because the DA provided him with a full rundown of the allegations made against Paul Mashatile last week. Just yesterday, Netwerk 24 reported that Mashatile's sons were awarded 3 tenders by the Gauteng Infrastructure Department. That isn't something that has happened in the past or a long time ago. Those 3 tenders run up until 2025, which means that as we sit in this room today, money is being funneled, public money is being funneled to the Mashatiles. It is simply untenable that the President is allowed to simply turn a blind eye to grand corruption happening in the office across the hall from him in the union buildings. Every single day that Paul Mashatile remains in office, that he is so patently unfit for, it is directly attributable to no one other than Cyril Ramaphosa. And frankly, it makes a complete sad joke of his repeated commitments to fighting corruption when it's happening under his nose in the union buildings. But I do want to pause here to acknowledge the incredible work of the brave journalists at News 24 and Netwerk 24 who put together so many pieces of this corruption puzzle. Can you just imagine what an outrage it would have been if the work of Woodward and Bernstein in the Watergate matter had simply been ignored or brushed away? So why should it be any different when it comes to the work of Cowan, Karim, and Wessels on their project of Mashatile Unmasked? And that is why the DA is not going to rest until Mashatile is held accountable, and we look forward to announcing some further action in this regard in the coming days. But what this whole sordid affair confirms is that the DA's task after the election is simply this: to fix what the ANC has broken. Now, on the 17th of February, we will be launching our manifesto at the Union Buildings in Pretoria. And that entire manifesto is centered and anchored in one critical fact. And that is that the road to rescuing and reforming South Africa runs straight through Parliament. Because beyond the corruption, the mismanagement, and the economic decline, a defining feature of the Ramaphosa administration is that the outgoing president never grasped the importance of Parliament. He seemed to be under the impression that by simply saying something, it would magically happen. Saying there should be bullet trains doesn't make it magically so. Saying load shedding must end doesn't magically make it so. Only the hard work, the hard yards, and the efforts of real legislative reform can make change possible. With this in mind, and given my many years of experience on the parliamentary benches, I'm proud to share with you today the blueprint for the DA's first 100 days in national government. This blueprint, we believe, will amount to the single most comprehensive legislative agenda of reform since 1994. Within the first 100 days of office, the DA will introduce legislation, not words, not promises, not dreams, legislation aimed at rescuing our country from the 5 key sources of state collapse. These reforms will be focused, like a laser beam, on the 5 following priority areas. 1, fixing the institution of Parliament itself in order to turn it into an engine room of reconstruction and reform. 2, ending load shedding by embracing privatization. 3, abolishing cadre deployment in favor of merit-based appointments and building a capable state. 4th, halving the rate of violent crime, including murder, attempted murder, and gender-based violence. And 5thly, growing the economy while protecting social grants. Out of all of the parties represented in Parliament, the DA is probably the one with the biggest respect and understanding and appreciation for the true role of Parliament. Many of us have spent our lives on those benches. And frankly, it is heartbreaking to witness what has come of this once proud institution and to see what it has been reduced to over the last few decades. The house from which history was made when F.W. de Klerk announced the end of apartheid. The house from which Nelson Mandela outlined a new vision for our country now lies burnt and in ashes. So in addition to prioritizing the physical reconstruction of Parliament, so that all South Africans can again be proud of their house, the DA last year published a comprehensive set of plans to make Parliament work for the people again. Over the last 2 decades, Parliament has been juniorized and defenestrated to the point now where it cannot even perform the basic functions that are laid out in the Constitution for it to perform. Every year, legislative output withers and dwindles away to the point where this last year was the lowest output of any legislation in any Parliament before it. We're going to do this by creating a committee to oversee the presidency, given the fact that so much power has been accommodated in that particular office, increasing the frequency of presidential questions, and introducing penalties, financial penalties, when members of the executive fail to perform their parliamentary functions and fail to pitch up to answer questions. Based on the model that we currently use within the Western Cape Legislature, we will reintroduce interpellations, which are snap debates and a great way of making sure that ministers are on top of their portfolios and are accountable. Finally, even with the DA in government, we will empower opposition MPs to serve as committee chairs. We want the best chairs to be selected to lead committees in Parliament. We do all of this because we are serious about oversight and accountability. The DA will take all of these steps within the first 100 days in government because they will give, finally, expression to the recommendations of the Zondo Commission, for which we spent a great deal of money, expended a great deal of time, but sadly which those recommendations of Judge Zondo lie gathering dust in a drawer in the union buildings. Also within the first 100 days, we will table legislation to rapidly increase private electricity generation and transmission. It is time now for South Africa to stop beating around the bush. We live in a failing state that cannot even fill potholes and get traffic lights working. Believe you me, that same state isn't going to end load shedding. It's time now to embrace privatization, especially when it comes to electricity. It's time to open up the industry to entrepreneurs and innovators and allow them to play into the space and rescue us from the darkness imposed by a state-owned monopoly. In government, the DA will reintroduce our bill to create an independent transmission system and market operator. And this entity will be urgently mandated to establish a fully private market for the trading and distribution of electricity. We see this as a huge job creation opportunity in South Africa, and we believe we can attract huge amounts of investment just by breaking the government monopoly on this. In the first budget tabled by a new multi-party government, the DA will push for the introduction of an expanded 75,000 Rand tax rebate to further encourage private households to install solar energy. Because if you look at where the relief is coming from, it is all coming from the private sector moving off grid and relieving the pressure. The DA's blueprint will also see us abolish cadre deployment from the face of this country. Within the first 100 days, we will introduce legislation that outlaws cadre deployment. By expanding our End Cadre Deployment Bill, we will make it a criminal offence for any politician to interfere in the appointment processes, and we will remove powers of appointment, promotion, and dismissal from politicians. Instead of that, the DA will fundamentally reform the Public Service Commission to become an independent custodian of the public sector with a mandate to ensure that all appointments into the public sector are based on merit and skill. We also look eagerly to the outcomes of the various court cases that the DA has instituted to expose the ANC's complete cadre deployment records and to declare this evil practice unconstitutional once and for all. Success in these court cases will pave the way for us to wipe the cadre deployment corruption from the face of South Africa. Our fourth priority is crime. Within 100 days, our blueprint will see the introduction of the Scorpions 2.0 through a constitutional amendment tabled in Parliament. This will create an independent anti-crime and anti-corruption institution on a multidisciplinary basis in Chapter 9 of the Constitution. We do this because we must learn the lessons from the demise of the original Scorpions by making it impossible for Parliament to simply disband them without a full 2/3 majority. At the same time, we will introduce a devolution bill to devolve policing powers to competent provincial and local governments. This will not only follow international best practice of bringing policing closer to the people, but as the DA has already demonstrated with our LEAP project in the Western Cape, devolved local policing will reduce violent crime by empowering well-run local governments to hire skilled, competent, properly trained, and properly equipped officers. At the same time, the abolition of cadre deployment will make sure that within the SAPs, offers and promotions will be on the basis of merit, skill, and ability to do the job. Finally, within 100 days, the DA will start preparations to introduce a new budget. Frankly, we might as well ignore what the President says at SONA and the budget that the current Finance Minister delivers later this month. We all know that these are going to be filled with desperate populist promises that the government knows that it cannot afford to keep. Just yesterday, it was revealed that the budget deficit has widened to 6%, its biggest in 2 years. The reality is, whatever Ramaphosa and Gondongwana promise in the next 2 weeks is not going to be able to be funded by a fiscus which is rapidly contracting. Years of SOE bailouts, unaffordable wage increases, and wasteful spending have brought us now to a point where the President will blow populist hot air about bullet trains and smart trains and magical economic growth to a country that's frankly stopped believing him a long, long time ago. The real SONA and budget to watch will be the ones that follow after a new government assumes office. After the election, this new government will immediately prepare to introduce a new budget that will reflect its new priorities. We will begin to use this budget to fundamentally restructure and reform the South African economy. And that is why we will focus like a laser beam on making the legislative changes and the regulatory changes that will be required to do this. Not talk, not promises, not due dawns, real legislative and regulatory reform. Unlike the ANC, we understand that social development is intrinsically and intricately linked to economic growth. And that is why our budget will contain no new tax increases, no bracket creep, and will start to reduce the unaffordable wage and debt bills that are currently suffocating our economy. I also want to make it very clear and very unequivocal that the DA will bury the ANC's populist, job-killing, socialist policies that come straight out of the left playbook. That includes expropriation without compensation. It includes the nationalization of mines, farms, industry, and the Reserve Bank, as well as the absolute madness of the NHI. On the NHI, I do want to take a moment again to applaud Business Unity South Africa and Business for South Africa for the principled stance that they are now taking against the NHI. The DA fully supports the call by business leaders for Ramaphosa not to sign the unconstitutional NHI bill and to instead refer it back to Parliament. The process that led to this bill completely ignored public input, and the bill itself is riddled with unconstitutional clauses. I do, however, have some bad news to share in this regard. On the 14th of December last year, the DA wrote to President Ramaphosa with this exact request, imploring him to do the right thing, refer the NHI bill back to Parliament so that we could do what we can to try and fix it. We made the point that given the flaws in the bill, it was in fact his constitutional duty as the President to do so. Now, nearly a month later, on the 11th of January this year, we finally received a response. Didn't come from the President, but from his parliamentary counsellor, Gerard Koornhof. Without even so much as addressing the substantive points we made about constitutionality and the points we made about the problems with the public participation and the fact that professional input from the health sector had completely been disregarded. We got the following back, and I quote from it. "You are kindly reminded that the DA participated in the parliamentary process related to this bill. The bill was thereafter approved by both houses in a parliamentary process in which the DA participated," unquote. I think we can take that as a no, all right? But more seriously, that the president sees to politic and send a politically motivated response to a request which in no way actually deals with the substantive issues and problems with the bill, shows that this is a party that is quite prepared to put our entire health sector at risk just to make a political point. We therefore also welcome the announcement by business leaders that they are considering legal action against the president if he persists along this route. And I want to make it clear and unequivocal again today that should the president continue to try and ram through this mad piece of legislation, the DA will immediately take him to court to protect our health system, secure the jobs of our doctors and health professions and our nurse, and prevent a large-scale capital flight that will inevitably result from the gutting of South Africa's health system. So any water you get in Joburg these days is in bottles. Bit hard to carry a JoJo tank around with you. But I want to just make a point, and that is that we really mustn't underestimate the immediate positive impact that a new DA-aligned budget, which redirects priorities away from destructive policies towards job creation and investor-friendly policies, will actually have on our country. For the first time in 3 decades, entrepreneurs, business people, investors, young people running side hustles, and hardworking South Africans will see a budget that finally respects them. For far too long, the ANC have viewed economic growth with suspicion, and they've treated the people who are responsible for growth and creating jobs as enemies. With the DA in government, investor sentiment will soar, and our new budget will kickstart the economy, economic growth, and job creation. And that can only be a good thing. The immediate stimulus of a jobs-friendly new budget will be followed by the introduction in Parliament of the DA's Responsible Spending Bill and our Social Impact Bill. The former will introduce a debt rule, which limits the amount of debt any government can add to the fiscus. The latter will replace the corruption of race-based BEE with means-tested empowerment that will truly benefit the 30 million South Africans who still live in desperate poverty and who are struggling to keep their heads above water in the greatest cost of living crisis in a generation. These initiatives are contained in our economic justice policy, and we believe they will bring empowerment that is truly broad-based, truly empowering, and truly designed to fight poverty. At the same time, the DA recognizes that the biggest threat facing the 30 million South Africans who are languishing in poverty is the prospect of money running out for social grants. Decades of ANC corruption and maladministration, looting and economic mismanagement has come to now pose the single biggest existential threat to social grants. Only a government anchored by the DA and built upon our track record of job creation and prudent financial management and good stewarding of public resources can protect the sustainability of social grants well into the future. So think about it. A parliament that actually works for the people. A private electricity market to end load shedding. A capable state free of cadre deployment and corruption. An independent crime-busting entity and stronger local policing. A budget that actually creates jobs and protects social grants. That is the DA's blueprint to rescue South Africa within 100 days of taking office. And it will improve the lives of every South African. Instead of a burnt-down parliament, a failing state riddled with corruption and cadre deployment, world record unemployment, uncontrolled violent crime, and a dying economy, this can be the new state of our nation just weeks from today. And for the first time ever, this new future is within reach as the ANC implodes and collapses. The DA has committed itself to serving as an anchor tenant for a new multi-party government and to carrying this blueprint into our coalition negotiations. Because we are serious about winning, because we are serious about rescuing South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day, the simple truth is simply this. South Africa's next government will either be a coalition of corruption with the ANC and EFF at its heart, which I believe will seal this country's fate for generations. Or it will be a multi-party charter government with the DA at its heart, which will implement the most comprehensive, exciting legislative reform agenda in a generation. When you strip away all the noise, and there's a lot of noise as we go into an election, those are the stakes in 2024. And in this election, the stakes are just too high for anybody who wants to rescue South Africa to stay at home. Today, I want to send a very clear message to every South African who is struggling to make ends meet. And that message is that help is on the way. Very soon, you will have a government that is on your side. A government that works for you every day to improve your lives. Not to improve the lives of politicians, but to improve your lives. That is my commitment to you. To get up every single morning and fight for you. Thank you very much.